Hello, everybody. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOPLP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and today I'm delighted to welcome Julie Seltzer. Julie is a Hebrew scribe, one of only a handful of women to have written a Torah scroll, an endeavor which requires great artistry, dedication, and a whole lot of hard work. She's coming to Newburyport, I'm happy to report, as part of Congregation Ahavas Achim's Scholar in Residence program to do a workshop called Inside the Scribe's Studio. That will be Sunday, April 14th at 3 p.m. and it's going to be free and open to the public. Julie, first of all, thank you for taking time to visit the morning show and welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. It's really good to be here.
Well, you know, when Rabbi Alex Matthews suggested that I might like to interview you, I was delighted because I had never heard of your unusual and fascinating profession, and I was eager to learn more about it, starting, Julie, with what led you to decide that you wanted to become a Hebrew scribe?
Well, it wasn't so much as a decision, as in some ways almost an accident, or at least it felt accidental or kind of happenstance.
Uh-huh.
I actually had no background in calligraphy.
Mhm.
Scribes handwrite these documents. I didn't have a background in visual art at all. In fact, I more recently stumbled upon a fourth grade report card and
Uh-huh.
saw that I had straight A's in every subject except for one, that is handwriting.
Oh.
And yes, for those for those of you that that may remember when handwriting was a subject in school.
Yes, I remember penmanship.
So none of the calligraphy aspects came to me with ease, but
Mm.
I had always loved language,
Mhm.
and especially Hebrew. I learned Hebrew as a child in Hebrew school. And then later in life, I studied ancient Jewish texts. So
Mm.
the Torah, the Talmud, as well as modern Hebrew.
Mhm.
And Torah, and more broadly, the way that Jews have interpreted and reinterpreted its contents, and sort of Torah in a narrow sense, meaning the five books of Moses, but Torah in a broader sense, meaning all of the Jewish traditions.
Hmm.
That really fascinated me.
Yeah.
So one afternoon in 2007, can't believe it's been this long. I was walking down the street and really just had a light bulb moment. It
Oh.
felt like it came out of the blue. I thought, I want to learn the script that's used for writing Torah scrolls.
Ah.
And at the time, it did not occur to me that I wanted to be a scribe or that
Mhm.
I would write a Torah scroll, but one thing led to another, and here I am.
Yeah.
And I'll also add that at that time, my mother was quite sick
Hmm.
with lung cancer. She'd
Oh.
recently been diagnosed, and I think that I was drawn to a practice that demands focus and a
Yeah.
turning inward, and something that was very structured,
Yeah.
that had clear rules as opposed
Yeah.
to the chaos and illness of death.
Oh.
I mean, this is all subconscious at the time, but I
Yeah.
think that facing her death and on an existential level my own,
Yeah.
I wanted to connect with something that transcends time, that was here
Yes.
before I came into the world and that will be here once I'm gone.
Julie, that makes perfect sense to me, and it's a very touching story. But it also sounds like the classic, you were called to do this. Um, and you know, often I think in my experiences when a light bulb goes off over your head lead to some of the unexpected but best turns in life. So
Yes.
anyway, thank you for that story. It's really interesting. Yeah. So
Thank you. Yeah, I think that it did have that flavor.
yeah. Well, there have been few women scribes, I understand, who have written Torah scrolls, and I'm curious to find out why have there been so few women who have been able or wanted to do this, and did you have to overcome barriers yourself because of your gender to do this work?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. The the reason has to do with a traditional Jewish framework called
Mhm.
halacha. And in this legal framework, it has been interpreted by many that the sacred writings that would be written by a woman would not be fit for ritual use.
Oh, okay.
And the
Mm.
reason for these interpretations, it's fairly complex and in the weeds of textual exegesis. So I won't
Okay.
go into the details.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but it is not interpreted by everyone to be the case.
Okay.
And I think on a personal level, I don't feel like I actually had to overcome barriers.
Hmm.
I have the feminists of a generation before me and generations
Hmm.
before me to thank for creating an environment in which I was raised and believed that I could do anything.
Hmm.
And so after I had that light bulb moment and I started to poke around online and kind of, do a little practicing on my own, it didn't occur to me. I didn't know that there were so
Mm.
few women doing this work.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
That I only realized once I started to
Yeah.
look for a teacher.
Yeah.
And I was lucky that there were both men and women willing to teach me. And
Hmm.
once I was proficient, I found that many communities, and the progressive ones certainly, were not only willing to hire a woman, but eager to engage a
Oh.
woman in the work of sacred writing.
Hmm. Well, that's really interesting. And, we all stand on the shoulders of all of the generations of feminists who came before us. And thank you very much. But it's interesting too that there had been enough feminists at work that you weren't even aware that there might be a barrier, which I'm sure was probably a helpful way to start
Yes,
your profession. So
indeed.
good. Yay. Well, you just used the phrase sacred writing, and one of the things I wanted to ask you, because it's an intriguing phrase to me, there's many kinds of writing, and I actually had never thought about what makes a particular kind of writing sacred. We can think about, what we think of as a sacred text, but this is writing, this is calligraphy. So what does make for sacred writing, both in terms of the content, the instruments that you may use, the paper, the ink, or the other tools, and I suppose also the attitude or the intention that you bring to bear
Mm.
on your work?
Mhm. Well, I'll start with what the content is.
Hmm.
So, sacred writing in Hebrew is referred to as stam.
Mm.
Stam is an acronym that stands for the particular texts that a scribe is trained to write. So I am called a soferet stam, a writer of these writings, and they include the Torah Scroll,
Mm-hmm.
Tefillin, Mezuzah, and Megillah. These are different writings used for different purposes. For
Mm-hmm.
example, Mezuzah is hung on the doorposts
Yeah.
of synagogues and Jewish homes, and inside is a small scroll handwritten by a scribe. The text comes from the Torah. So
Mm.
these are all written according to particular rules.
Mm-hmm.
The letters have to follow a certain form, and they're written by a Jewish scribe who's trained in these rules. So it's
Mm.
both about the artistry, but it's also about the rules for writing them. So
Yeah.
um, and in terms of the intention, that's a big piece of it. The scribe has to have intention, and in fact, makes that intention statement out loud before starting to write something. So
Oh.
before I write anything, for example, let's say I'm starting a Torah scroll, I would say out loud, I'm writing this for the sake of the sanctity of this holy writing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, even though we have ways at this in this era, and we have had ways since the advent of the printing press to mechanically print these documents, but our tradition has gone in the direction of maintaining that a human being writes them.
Mm.
And the primary reason has to do with intention,
Mm-hmm.
because intention cannot be placed into these scrolls without the humanity in
Yeah.
them. And in terms of the material, they're all written on the animal skin of a kosher species, like
Mm-hmm.
a cow or a sheep, or goat or a
Mm-hmm.
deer. And I'll mention that it's not permitted to kill an animal in order to use
Mm-hmm.
its skins for sacred
Mm-hmm.
writings. It has to be already dead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the ink has to be black and long
Mm-hmm.
lasting. It's usually a gall
Yeah.
ink, if that means anything to the calligraphers out there.
It
And
doesn't, it doesn't to me, but I'm sure it does to them.
to
So.
someone it does. And typically scribes write with a feather quill
Okay.
or a reed, but
Uh-huh.
technically any writing instrument is permissible.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting, Julie. And the thing that strikes you the most is that what you're describing in terms of intention is that the calligrapher brings an attitude of devotion, I guess is the word that comes to my mind. And you're not going to get that from a printing press. Um,
Exactly.
and so it instills or embeds into the text and into the process of creating the text that attitude of devotion that's spiritual and respectful. So thank you for that description. It's really interesting. I'm curious to find out because the Torah is a scroll. You unfold it, and I realized how long is a scroll? I mean, even in terms of feet or meters, and how long does it take to finish one?
A long time.
I'll bet.
Well, in terms of how many feet, that depends on the size of the scroll. So scrolls can vary in terms of the size of the lettering, but
Oh,
you usually, it can, if you open it all up, it will go around a very large room.
okay,
Um,
yeah.
and in terms of the actual number of letters, there are 304,805
Wow.
letters in a Torah
Wow.
scroll. And in a typical layout, it will have 245 columns of text that
Wow.
are all 42 lines in each column, and
Hmm.
many sheets in that typical layout, 62 sheets, all sewn together with a special kosher string made from
Hmm.
animal sinew called
Hmm.
geed. And it takes me, if I'm writing a new scroll, about a year and a half of
Wow.
full-time work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's devotion for sure. Absolutely.
If that isn't devotion, I don't know what is.
If you didn't have devotion, I don't know how you'd find the patience also it must take and the precision of the detail orientation of work. So and that actually brings me to something else I was curious about as I thought about, what you do. Is there any room for interpretation or your own personal ornamentation as you work as a scribe? Or, and I suspect it's the latter, but you tell me, do you have to precisely reproduce what other scribes have written and the manner in which they inscribe it?
Yeah, so not only do we aim to reproduce what other scribes have written, we must
Oh,
reproduce
okay.
what other
Yeah.
scribes have written. I mean, that is the point of
Mhm.
this whole project. The conceptual idea is that the Torah scroll is the very same Torah scroll that was first given, according to tradition, to Moses directly
All
from
right.
God. Now,
Yeah.
I consider this mythological, not historical,
Hmm.
but this is a foundational myth
Hmm.
that represents the centerpiece of our religion.
Hmm.
And incredibly, very little has changed in the text of the Torah for 2,000 years.
Hmm.
So no changing words, as much as we would like to change some of the words that no longer speak to us or that we might consider
Yeah.
problematic.
Yeah.
But instead, we're invited to grapple with the words that we may not
Oh,
like and
okay.
reinterpret them in every
Hmm.
generation.
Hmm.
I mean, even the rabbis of the Talmud um, flipped the meaning of the words of the Torah on their head and spin them to create new concepts that adhered to their way of life.
Hmm.
And that's really what Torah is, as I see it. That's the process of interpretation and reinterpretation over the generations. But in order to do that reinterpretation and have a shared conversation across time and
Hmm.
space, the text of the scroll stays the same. Um, that being said, the scroll is also handwritten. So, I mean, you asked about, our own ornamentation, not our own ornamentation, but everyone has different handwriting. So
Yes.
each scroll is necessarily unique, as anyone who's ever tried to forge a note for, math homework, getting out of math homework or whatever. You might remember. It's very hard to copy someone else's writing. Nearly impossible.
I'll assume this is not from personal experience, Julie.
Absolutely not. No, 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 never.
But I understand what you're saying, and it makes sense that the Torah itself has a very, very long history and a sacred history. And so it kind of must remain as it always has been. But that gives you a launching pad for acknowledging the history and how things may have changed over the years, and then you can dialogue with the text. But it provides everyone in your faith with a shared text that remains the same throughout history. And then you can have a dialogue and interpret, reinterpret, and actually speak with the history, so to speak.
Exactly.
And thank you for your explanation of I had wanted to ask you about the role that the Torah plays in Judaism, but you already answered that in large part. But I am curious to find out, since this was your kind of call with the light bulb to do this kind of work, and I know the Torah is not the only document that you scribe, but what does the Torah mean to you personally?
Wow. That's a big question, but I think that the Torah for me is, or I'll speak to one aspect of it that is meaningful to me, which is I see it as an anchor. And I find it amazing that we have successfully passed it down through the ages, because if you think about it, almost nothing lasts more than a couple of generations, whether that is a physical object or an idea. They get lost, right?
Yeah.
But copying the text of the Torah over in each generation, it's really a brilliant way to communicate into the future. It's like a time capsule. And that really fascinates me. Yeah, a time capsule for our tradition. And I feel very honored to be part of the chain of scribes who are tasked with this transcription of that information, or of that seed of an idea that is passed down from generation to generation.
Well, Julie, that's beautifully and imaginatively put. I love that idea of the time capsule that connects. Really, it's eternal, isn't it? Because it connects, what you're saying is it connects the past and the miracle of its survival as long as it has, but it also connects it because it stays the same thanks to the work of scribes such as yourself for people in the future. I love that idea. So thank you for that. I'm gonna enjoy thinking about that all day. I mean, Julie, I was also going to ask you what gave you joy about your work, but I think you just answered that. unless you have anything else that you wanted to add about that.
Well, yeah, I'll add a couple of things about the
Sure.
joy. I like having a role in the community, and that I'm able to offer something of value and help communities and synagogues maintain their scrolls. And I love teaching about the scrolls and letting people in on some of the secrets of the trade, so to speak. It's like it's a realm that's often inaccessible, and that doesn't have to be the case. And it shouldn't be the case. We can maintain awe and wonder for something even when we understand its mechanics. It's a different kind of awe, and it's a different kind of love. I think it's more intimate. So yeah, I get a lot of joy from teaching about it and talking to people about it.
Well, that brings us to the next question I wanted to ask you. It has to do with the program that you'll be presenting here in Newburyport for Ahavas Achim on April 14th. Tell us something about what will happen. I think it's called Inside the Scribe Studio. So what are some of the kinds of things that you will convey to people?
Yes, so thanks for mentioning that. I'm really excited about that program and to be in Newburyport, and I hope folks will come. So I'll be teaching about the basics, the nature of the work, all of the materials in more detail, including the ink and the parchment and the quills and how it's all done. I leave a ton of room for questions, and there are always a lot of questions. And also at the end of the presentation, we'll look inside a Torah scroll. We'll see it up close from
Oh,
a scribe's perspective. So even for people who are familiar with the scroll, we'll see things that we hadn't noticed before.
right.
So that's always enlightening for folks.
And as you frame it, it's an encounter then with eternity, which is a great opportunity. So,
Wow, I love that. I love that. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to use that. An
well,
encounter with eternity. That's
well,
brilliant.
I know that that Rabbi Matthews plans to invite the entire community to your workshop, and he told me that he plans, in particular, to reach out to the broader faith community and also the arts community in Greater Newburyport, as well, of course, as of course to the congregation. I hope that you might talk a little bit about what members of these other communities will find engaging and illuminating or inspiring about your work and your story.
Yeah. So I was about to say, I love that it will be open to the broader community, and I think everyone comes from a different perspective and a different interest. So the artists might want to hear more, about the ink, about the gall ink,
Yes.
or, and folks of different faiths might want to hear about the Torah. Why is it just the 5 books of Moses that's copied by hand? Why not the rest of um, the what's referred to as the Old Testament, all of the Jewish Bible? And actually, one other part of the Jewish Bible is written by hand. That is the Book of Esther. So there may be textual questions, questions about Hebrew, questions about the script, and the Hebrew script that we use now. This is a little taster. Is actually not the same script that was being used at the time that these texts started to emerge. Changed quite a bit. So we'll have a little bit about that. And I actually wrote my first Torah scroll on display at a museum, and I did Q&A twice a day, and I have to say, the museum had visitors from all over and from all different backgrounds, and I absolutely loved all the different questions that they brought. So I hope folks will come with their questions and curiosities, and I look forward to meeting them.
Well, that sounds wonderful, Julie. Thank you so much for that. And I would add, for people who are interested in learning more about Julie's work, you can visit her website at www.hebrewscribe.com. And if you want information about her workshop on April 14th, you can visit Ahavas Achim's website. That's www.caa-newburyport.org. So, Julie, thank you so much. It's been really fun. I've learned so much from talking to you. And your devotion, and I would also add the word your passion for the work that you do comes through so clearly. So it's been really fun, and you've expressed yourself so beautifully. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Well, I also really had a lot of fun doing this interview. Thank you so much, Mary, for your brilliant thoughts that I'm going to steal for my next talk.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much, Julie. That's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Till then, be well.